Hello students, this is Module 1.3.7, Species Interaction 3. The three interactions that we're going to discuss fall under the umbrella of symbiosis. Symbiosis is defined as a relationship in which two species live in close association with one another. The three interactions we're going to discuss are commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. First, we're going to discuss mutualism. Mutualism, you'll recall, is a win-win interaction in which the presence of each species is beneficial to the other. The photograph on this slide shows an example of such an interaction, as it shows an acacia and ants. The acacia tree has very few defenses. It doesn't invest in toxic chemicals, doesn't have really effective spines. Any insect that lands upon it almost could eat it. And that is, if it were not for the presence of the ant mutualists, which live in close association with that acacia tree. We can see some of the ants there. You can see on the left part of the picture here, that brown thing is a spine, and it is a hollow spine, and it is inside the spine that the ants live. And the tree, in addition to providing a home, also provides food. These little round objects here that are produced by the plant are full of proteins and vitamins. In addition, at the base of the leaves, there are nectaries. The nectaries are simply glands that produce sugar water. The sugar water has no function for the physiology of the plant. It is simply a reward for the ants. And what the ants do to earn this room and board, if you will, that the acacia provides, is the ants act as a standing army for the acacia tree. Should a grasshopper land upon the acacia and start to munch upon its leaves, it will be swarmed upon by the defending ants. If a nearby plant grows a tendril onto the acacia tree, the ants that are living in the acacia will swarm out and clip off the leaves of the offending tree. So it's a very good relationship for both species involved. Another example of mutualism is pollination, as this slide shows. Pollination is when the pollen from one flower is moved to another flower of the same species, often by an animal pollinator. That's what's shown on these pictures. It can be an insect, it can be a vertebrate, a bird or a mammal, and a variety of different types of insects. And the types of pollination relationships are often very specific, in which there is a single pollinator species that is responsible for moving pollen between the plants of another of that plant species. Pollination, of course, allows plants to have sex. An unpollinated flower shrivels up and falls off. A pollinated flower develops into a fruit which contains seeds, which allows the plant species to perpetuate itself. A second interaction that falls under the umbrella of symbiosis is commensalism. Commensalism is an interaction in which one species benefits and the other is not benefited nor harmed. And I'm going to use the example at the lower left. You can see a shark, and underneath it there's a little fish with a sucker on its head called a remora. The remora feeds upon scraps when the shark feeds, and it hitches the ride with the shark, not really hurting it. You can see that this could be harmful if there were many remoras on one shark, but typically there's only one. And so this is an example of where the remora benefits and the shark is not really harmed nor benefited. The photograph on the right shows a saguaro cactus, and it shows a saguaro growing up in a shrub. Now, when saguaros first germinate, they're tiny, about as big as the end of your little pinky finger. They're just tiny little globs of green, and they only survive beneath the canopy of other plants that are bigger and older, typically called nurse plants. And so this is a nurse plant association. And at first the saguaro was just tiny and it doesn't do any harm to the nurse plant. And so we could consider it commensalism at that point. I included this example to show you that the interactions between species can be dynamic. For as the saguaro grows, the interaction changes from one of commensalism to one of competition. And it is a very common sight that the saguaro cactus will overgrow and later kill its nurse plant, which allowed it to become established in the first place. So this shows the dynamic nature of those interactions. The third and final category of interaction under symbiosis is parasitism. Parasitism is a symbiosis in which one organism, the parasite, benefits at the expense of the other, the host. This shows a leech, and although it's a very beautiful photograph, really, although kind of morbid in a way, I suppose, but a leech is perhaps not the best example. Let's look at some of the basic types of parasites, and toward the end of the semester, when we're studying animals without backbones, we'll talk more about parasites and their biology. Here we're just going to go lightly over the topic. The parasite, remember, lives on or in another organism, receives a benefit, but it provides no benefit in return. There's two main categories: ectoparasites, and these are parasites that live on the outer surface of their host, such as fleas, lice, and ticks. And I have to tell you that of all the photographs I show you, this one of the fleas right here grosses me out worse than almost any of them. Over here on the left, we see different stages of lice, and right here on this little box with the gray background, those are what are called nits, or egg cases of lice. If you've ever heard the expression nitpicker, it's in relation to this: someone who looks at very small details, very small things, picking the nits, which are the egg cases which are cemented to the hairs of the host that lice are parasitizing. We can look at a second category of parasites. These are called endoparasites. These are parasites that live within the body of their host. Think of things like worms, roundworms, flatworms, some protists, such as the one that causes the disease malaria, bacterial infections, viral infections. These are all examples of endoparasites, organisms that are living inside their host rather than on the outside of the body. This picture here is a mass of roundworms or nematodes that were taken out of the intestine of a vertebrate animal. Another example of a roundworm infection is elephantiasis, not elephantitis, but elephantiasis. And this is when roundworms, whose young are carried by mosquitoes, actually become so numerous that they block the lymph ducts of people. This is a disease typical of the tropics, and this shows the result. You can have this malformation of various appendages, and the thing is, even if the worms are killed through treatment, this tissue swelling doesn't go down. It has to be surgically repaired, and typically people who contract it do not have the medical care to do that. So it's really a very tragic occurrence. Other examples of parasites include things like tapeworms. This shows the scolex, or the organ of attachment. Those are not eyes, those are suckers, and those are hooks. And each of the body sections can mature and be full of eggs and fall off. These worms live inside the intestines, and the proglottids, or the body sections, pass out with the feces, and this continues the life cycle. The last example of a parasite that I'm going to give you is a pinworm. Pinworms are tiny, and it's estimated that up to 60% of children in some areas, and we're talking in the United States, may have pinworms. Pinworms cause very few adverse effects, and they're easily transmissible between children. That's why they have such high rates of infection. We'll talk more about the biology of pinworms when we discuss invertebrates. So this shows the 6 interactions that we have discussed in the last couple of modules. You should be able to produce this table from memory. You should memorize the names of the 6 interactions and know if it's a plus, minus, 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 plus 0 interaction as such. Before we leave the discussion and close this module, the discussion of interactions, I stuck in another example. This is not in your notes, and I just stuck it in because it is a very interesting example. And so let me talk about that, and then we'll close the module after that. I ask here, is it really that simple? And the answer is no. And then we're going to give you an example from South America of oropendulas, which are relatives of blackbirds, which build these long hanging nests, cowbirds, which are birds which parasitize nests, and two types of insects, wasps and flies, bot flies in particular. So let's go through the players one by one. The oropendula is a relative of the blackbird. It lives in the neotropics, which is the New World tropics, so Central America and South America, and it builds a pendulous nest. In a slide or two, I'll show you a photograph of that nest. Cowbirds are nest parasites. Cowbirds don't build their own nests. Rather, they lay their eggs in the nest of another bird, and the cowbird babies have evolved to hatch very quickly from the egg and to grow very fast, and so they're bigger than the other birds in the nest, and they will push some of them out, or they will certainly compete for food. Now, cowbirds seem like they are only bad for the birds, but we'll discuss that. Another player in this scenario are botflies. Botflies lay eggs on living birds, and the maggots develop parasitically. They burrow into the flesh and eat the flesh, and they typically kill the host. That is, if they lay their eggs on a baby bird, the baby bird will probably be killed by the developing fly. Now, wasps that we're going to talk about, these are predators on other insects, and they're very territorial. So this kind of sets up our scenario. And so here, this actually shows the nests of oropendulas. Here is an adult oropendula. Here are some wasps. Here is a botfly that's been pinned, so it just looks like a fly. Some of the botflies are pretty flat. But here's a baby bird that was killed by a botfly. This is not an oropendula chick necessarily. And this shows a cowbird. It's a blackish bird. And notice here in this nest we see a cowbird on the left, the bigger cowbird chick, and the two smaller birds here, just showing the discrepancy in size. Now, in some areas, oropendulas discriminate against cowbirds by recognizing the foreign egg, and they recognize it. In other words, a cowbird will come and lay an egg in the oropendula nest. The oropendula will look at it and go, that egg isn't right, and it will push it out. And it turns out that upon study, that those oropendulas that discriminate against cowbirds, they were in trees with wasps. Those oropendulas that did not discriminate against cowbirds and allowed the cowbird egg to stay in there, they nested in trees without wasps. This is an interesting dichotomy, an interesting fork in the road of the behavior of oropendulas. It turns out, giving us some insight as to why there might be this dichotomy or this difference in behavior, removing the cowbird egg or not removing the cowbird egg. Those oropendulas that nest in trees with wasps are not bothered by botflies. Those in trees without wasps suffer very heavy nestling mortality because of botflies. So here's another dichotomy between the situation. Okay, so if there are wasps, the wasps actually hunt the flies and keep the flies away. If there are no wasps, then the flies can freely lay their eggs on the babies in the nest. Now, here are some conclusions that are interesting, and this is after long years of study of this system. Cowbirds, remember, they develop what we call precocially. That is, they open their eyes very early, and they actually are capable of snapping at insects like botflies. And they defend not only themselves, but they also defend the helpless oropendula chicks. Aha! So we're seeing that the cowbirds, which when they are there and there are no botflies, they are parasitic, but when they are there and there are botflies, they serve a useful purpose. They can help to defend the oropendula chicks. Now, oropendula chicks in trees without wasps were 9 times less likely to be attacked by botflies in nests with cowbird chicks. So there is a benefit. And it turns out that 3 times as many Oropendola chicks fledged with cowbirds compared to without, if there are botflies present. That is, if there are no wasps to keep the botflies away, then the cowbirds are beneficial. With wasps, that is, no botflies, cowbirds were solely parasitic and reduced Oropendola nest success. So, wow, this is some insightful research that's showing these interactions there. And so the shifting relationships in the presence of wasps, no botflies, cowbirds were parasites on Oropendolas, and the absence of wasps with botflies in the nest, cowbirds were mutualists with Oropendolas. That is really a very interesting kind of result to have. And we're going to conclude our module with that.